The sun hung low in the sky, casting golden hues that washed over the village, bathing it in warmth and a sense of peace. The winds whispered through the leaves of the tall trees surrounding the village, while the scent of earth and life filled the air. The sounds of children's laughter echoed in the distance, their carefree spirits filling the village with joy. Women worked together in small groups, weaving baskets and preparing meals, their faces glowing with the rhythm of daily life. Elders sat in clusters, deep in conversation, their voices carrying the weight of generations. Yet, beneath this peaceful exterior, there was an undercurrent of tension. Like a storm waiting to break, the village was a place where nature and the people were intertwined in a delicate balance. The elders often spoke of the spirits of the land, of the trees and rivers, that whispered wisdom to those who listened closely. They believed that when the harmony of the people was disrupted, it was like disturbing the natural order of the world. And now, in the quiet of one household, there was a disturbance, a storm brewing in the heart of a marriage. Kofi and Amina's once blissful home now seemed like a prison, where love had turned into silence and neglect. Kofi, tall and broad-shouldered, walked through the doorway of their home with the weight of the world on his shoulders. His hard hands were calloused from years of labor, his brow furrowed with the burdens of being the sole provider. In the village, he was admired for his strength and success, but in the quiet of his home, he was becoming a man blinded by pride, unaware of the pain he caused his wife, Amina. Amina sat in the corner of the room, her hands wrapped around the edges of a basket. She had been weaving. Her beauty had always been the talk of the village. Her skin was smooth like the polished stones in the river, and her eyes sparkled with kindness. Yet beneath her calm exterior, she was a woman burdened with silent suffering. She had always been the dutiful wife, never questioning, always serving. But now the years of neglect had taken their toll. She had given all of herself to Kofi, and in return, she had received nothing but emptiness. "I brought home more yams today," Kofi said, his voice deep, but tinged with irritation. "There's enough for the whole village." Amina looked up, her gaze distant. She nodded, but her heart felt like it was crumbling. "That's good," she whispered. Her voice, once filled with warmth, now held the chill of 1,000 unspoken words. Kofi noticed her distant look, but he did not understand. "Why do you always look so tired? What have you done all day?" he asked, his words like a sharp wind that pierced through the stillness. Amina's chest tightened. She had spent the day cooking, cleaning, and caring for the children. But no matter how much she did, it was never enough. She tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Her heart ached with the weight of her unspoken feelings. Kofi, growing impatient, stormed out of the room, his footsteps heavy on the earth beneath him. Amina was left alone in the silence of the room, her eyes welling with tears. The tears, however, were not for the life she had with Kofi, but for the life she could never have. A life where she was seen, truly seen, for the woman she was. Outside, the elders gathered beneath the ancient tree that stood at the center of the village. Their eyes were clouded with wisdom and age, but their voices were clear, their words powerful. They spoke of the balance of life, of the spirits in the wind, and of the need to maintain harmony. But even the elders could feel the disturbance in the air, the dissonance that had begun to grow between Kofi and Amina. They had seen many marriages, many conflicts, but this was different. This was a fracture that threatened to break not only the bond between husband and wife, but the very fabric of the village. "Listen to the winds," the eldest elder, Nana Kwabena, said, his voice like thunder. "The balance is disturbed, the heart of the family is broken, but it is not too late. There is always a path to healing." Another elder, Essie, spoke softly but with conviction. A marriage is like a garden. It requires both to tend to it. If one is neglectful, the garden withers. But if both choose to water it, to nurture it, it can flourish once again. Kofi, unaware of the wisdom being shared just beyond his home, remained trapped in his pride. He had worked hard for everything he had, and he believed that was enough. He saw his success as proof of his worth, and he could not understand why. Amina could not simply be content with what he had provided. But Amina was no longer content. She had spent years quietly suffering, but now she felt a stirring deep within her. She was tired of being invisible, tired of being a shadow in her own life. She wanted more. She wanted to feel valued, to be seen for who she truly was. She had begun to see the cracks in her marriage, and the realization that she had been living in a cage, bound by tradition and duty, began to consume her thoughts. As the days passed, Amina's heart grew heavier, burdened by the weight of her unspoken desires. She found herself thinking of Kwame, the man from the neighboring village. He had always been kind to her, always listened when she spoke. Unlike Kofi, he did not see her as a mere extension of his ambition. He saw her as a person, a woman of strength and beauty. And for the first time in years, Amina felt something stir within her, a longing for something different, something real. Kwame had admired Amina from afar. For a long time, he had watched her endure the silence of her marriage, and he had always wanted to offer her the love and respect she deserved. But he had kept his distance, knowing that to interfere with the sacred bond between husband and wife would bring dishonor. Yet now, as he saw the sorrow in her eyes, he could no longer hold back. He believed that he could offer Amina a life free from the constraints of her marriage, a life where she could be seen and loved for who she truly was. But Amina was torn. She was still bound by tradition, by the sacred vows she had made to Kofi. Yet the thought of a life with Kwame, of freedom, of love, felt like a beacon calling her in the distance. And as the days wore on, the tension between her heart and her duty grew unbearable. One evening, as the sun set and the village settled into the calm of night, the breaking point came. Kofi returned home late, his mood dark and angry. The tension in the room was thick, the air heavy with unsaid words. Amina stood by the window, staring out into the night, her heart racing. She knew that something had to change, that the silence could no longer be her only answer. Why do you always look at the stars as if they hold the answers? Kofi's voice broke through her thoughts. Amina turned to face him, her eyes cold. Because, Kofi, she said softly, her voice steady but full of emotion. The stars are free. They do not have to answer to anyone. The words hung in the air between them, and for the first time in a long while, Kofi felt a tremor of doubt, but it was too late. Amina's heart had already begun to break free. As Amina turned away, her gaze lingered on the stars outside. The winds whispered through the trees, carrying with them a message from the elders, a message of balance and redemption. But in her heart, Amina knew that the path to healing would not come from Kofi's apology or from Kwame's desire. It would come from within her, from the strength she had long buried beneath her duty. She had to find herself again, before she could ever think of healing the wounds of her marriage. The night was quiet, but Amina's heart was no longer silent. It was free. The village sat still beneath the dying light of the day. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of crimson, as if it too were bleeding from some unseen wound. The elders had always said that the setting sun symbolized the balance between life and death. The sun, as it left the earth, was making its way to the spirit world, where it would be reborn with the dawn. But tonight, there was no promise of A new day for Amina. The land, though bathed in golden warmth, felt cold to her heart. Amina had once danced in the light of this village, laughing with the children, greeting the elders, filling the house with the delicious smells of her cooking. But that warmth had long since gone, replaced by shadows. Kofi, her husband, was rarely home, working tirelessly in the fields. Yet when he did return, he would dominate her every move, ordering her to prepare food, cleaning with harsh words, leaving no space for Amina's voice. Her needs were as invisible as the wind, and her heart, once a fire of love, had become like a smoldering ember, barely alive, but still burning in secret. Amina's days had become a blur. From dawn to dusk, she worked endlessly, her hands moving over the cooking pots and the dishes, with no thought of herself, no thought of what she desired, or how she felt. Kofi had always believed that his strength was the foundation of their marriage, that his labor in the fields meant she should be eternally grateful. Yet in the silence of her own thoughts, Amina began to wonder, was this all her life was destined to be? A wife who existed only to fulfill her husband's desires, yet was never truly seen. One evening, as she kneaded the dough for bread, the thought struck her like a lightning bolt. Was this it? She paused, her hands frozen in midair. The bread dough had become a symbol of her life, a weight, sticky, and hard to move. She longed to ask for freedom, to demand respect from Kofi. But the culture, the traditions, and the unspoken rules that bound her held her in place. Kofi's absences had left a hollowness in the house. There were no more shared conversations, no more laughter. His commands, when he was home, felt more like orders from a master than requests from a partner. The kitchen, once the heart of the house, now felt like a prison. Even the walls that had seen the love they once shared, seemed to whisper the weight of her sacrifice. Her heart was heavy, and no matter how much she cooked or cleaned, it could not fill the emptiness inside. She stood in the doorway one evening, looking out at the village, the sounds of children playing, the songs of women weaving baskets, the laughter of neighbors, all seemed to mock the silence that filled her own life. It was as though the village was alive with joy, yet she was locked in a cold, silent room. I have given everything, she whispered to herself, her voice barely a breath. But what have I received in return? Then came Kwame, a neighbor who had long admired Amina from afar. He would often stop by, under the guise of needing something, some salt or a cup of water, but his true intention was to speak with her, to listen to her. Amina, though conflicted, found solace in his company. His words, gentle and kind, were like cool water on a parched soul. Where Kofi was demanding and cold, Kwame was warm and understanding. I see you, Amina, Kwame said one evening, sitting across from her on the worn bench outside her hut. I see the pain in your eyes. I see how much you give, yet it seems you are never seen. Amina looked at him, her heart thudding in her chest. She had never heard such words before. Words that acknowledged her pain, that recognized her sacrifice. It felt like a balm on a wound she had carried for years. I do what I must, she replied softly, but her voice trembled. I have no choice. I am bound by duty, by the traditions of our people. Kwame reached out, his hand brushing against hers. You are not bound to this, Amina. You deserve more. You deserve to be seen. His words hung in the air like an invitation, tempting her to imagine a life where her voice mattered, where her desires were not ignored. But Amina pulled back, afraid of what these feelings might lead to. Still, the comfort of his presence lingered, filling the empty spaces Kofi's absence had left behind. It was one evening, as Amina sat quietly by the fire, preparing a meal, that the world shifted. She had overheard Kofi speaking to his friend, Amina, in the village square. "You know," Kofi said, his voice loud and filled with pride. "All I have today is because of my own strength. I worked hard, I fought the land, and look at me now. My house, my food, all of it is because of me." Amina laughed. "And what of your wife? Surely she plays a part," Kofi scoffed. "Amina, she is just a servant. She prepares my food, keeps my house. She is part of the landscape, just as the trees and the river are part of this place. She doesn't matter." Amina's heart broke with each word. How many years had she slaved over his food, over his clothes, over their home? And yet to him, she was nothing more than a tool, a servant. The rage that had simmered inside her for so long bubbled to the surface. The years of neglect, the silence, the invisible pain. It all felt unbearable in that moment, that night, as Amina lay in bed. The darkness around her seemed to pulse with energy. The words of her mother came to her, whispered from the past. "Remember, Amina, food is more than sustenance. It is power. In our village, food carries the spirit. If you know the herbs, you know the truth." Amina closed her eyes and thought about the herbs her mother had taught her to use, the ones that held secrets and truths. There was one in particular, an herb known for revealing the heart of a man when consumed. It was said to expose the deepest desires and feelings, no matter how well hidden. The thought stirred something inside her. Was it time to act? Could she use the power of food to reveal Kofi's true nature? The idea of using this knowledge, of reclaiming her power through such an ancient act, filled her with both fear and exhilaration. The weight of her choice pressed down on her. But there was no turning back now. Kofi must see the truth. The next morning, Amina woke early. The sun was still rising, casting long shadows over the land. She gathered the herbs, each one chosen carefully. The dried root of the alaloo plant, the bitter leaf of the onwuka shrub, each had a purpose. Amina moved with the steady rhythm of a woman who knew her craft. The smells of the herbs filled the room, their potent fragrance thick in the air. As she prepared the meal for Kofi, Amina thought of the spirits her mother had spoken of. "What you give to the earth gives back threefold," her mother had said. She was offering Kofi more than food today. She was offering him a chance to confront his own soul. The room seemed to hold its breath as Amina ground the herbs, her hands steady, but her heart racing. The air was thick with a sense of anticipation, as though the spirits were watching. Each stroke of the mortar felt like it carried her closer to something beyond her control. For a moment, doubt crept into her heart. Was this the right thing to do? Would the spirits punish her for using their gifts in such a way? But the years of pain, the years of silence, pressed her forward. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. The truth cannot be buried forever. It must come to light. With the meal prepared, Amina stood before the fire, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it. There was no turning back. She would serve Kofi this meal, and when he ate it, he would see the truth. She felt the weight of her decision pressing against her chest. Her mind was a swirl of fear and excitement. She knew this meal would change everything, but she also knew that it had to be done. Kofi had to face what he had done to her, to their marriage, to their love. As the meal simmered, the air grew heavier. Still, the land itself seemed to wait with her, as if holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Amina took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she carried the food to Kofi. The time for silence was over. It was time to serve the truth. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting long shadows over the village. Its warm embrace clung to the earth. The day's work now nearly over. Kofi, a man of tall stature and fierce pride, walked home, his feet heavy in the dust of the fields. His body, worn and cracked from the labor of the day, still bore the tension of his mind, an arrogance that was as much a part of him as his bones. As he neared the home he had made with Amina, he wiped the sweat from his brow, his mind already turning to the comforts awaiting him. Amina, quiet and watchful, stood at the threshold of the kitchen, her hands trembling with a mixture of fear and resolve. She had been waiting for this moment, the moment that had built within her heart, slowly turning from a seed of discomfort into a flame that threatened to consume her. She watched Kofi approach, his silhouette framed by the setting sun, and she knew that once this meal was served, there would be no turning back. The door creaked open as Kofi stepped inside, his voice gruff and tired. "Amina, the fields have nearly broken my back today. Where is my meal?" Amina's heart quickened, but she steadied herself. She had prepared the meal carefully, each ingredient chosen with purpose. It was not just food, it was a symbol, a key to unlocking the truth that had been hidden too long beneath the layers of pride and silence. She placed the dish before him, her hands steady, despite the turmoil inside her. The meal was rich with the scent of spices, the herbs releasing their essence into the air, filling the room with a heady aroma. Kofi took a deep breath, his stomach growling in anticipation, and without a second thought, he began to eat. It smells good, woman. You've done well today." But Amina said nothing. She only watched, her gaze fixed on him, her thoughts swirling like a storm in her chest. She had done this for years, cooked, cleaned, and served with love. But now, it felt different. This was not an act of service, but a moment of reckoning. She stood by the door, her heart pounding in her chest, each beat echoing louder than the last. The quiet of the room pressed on her, thick and suffocating. She waited, breathless, watching. As Kofi ate, his once confident demeanor beginning to shift, the herb, hidden within the meal, had begun its work. Slowly, silently, it crept into Kofi's senses. At first, it was nothing more than a subtle warmth in his chest, a slight dizziness that he dismissed. But soon, his mind began to cloud, and his hands, once steady, trembled. His eyes flickered, confusion creeping into the strong gaze he had always worn, like armor. "Amina, what is this? My head is spinning." Amina said nothing. Her eyes were fixed on him, but she could not help the small flutter of hope that began to rise within her. For the first time, Kofi seemed vulnerable, exposed. She had never seen him like this before, and it both frightened and exhilarated her. Amina, I never thought I'd be like this. His voice faltered, and for the first time, he stumbled over his words. His body, so strong and proud, was now swaying slightly, as though the very earth beneath him was no longer solid. I've always thought of you as nothing more than a servant, Amina. You were there to serve me, to fuel my work, my ambitions. I never saw what you truly are. The sacrifices you made, the love you gave, I took it all for granted. My pride, my jealousy, it blinded me. Each word that fell from his lips felt like a jagged stone. The truth, buried so deep within him, had come forth with a violence that left Amina reeling. His confession was raw, drenched in sorrow and regret. She could hear the breaking of a man, the crumbling of the walls he had so carefully built around himself. This man, who had once ruled her world with authority and arrogance, was now stripped of all pretense. Amina's heart ached. The vindication she had hoped for, the justice she had longed for, came not as sweet victory, but as a bitter, painful truth. Her hands clenched at her sides, as she listened to Kofi's voice crack under the weight of his confession. Amina, I see now that I was a fool. I neglected you, ignored you, and for what? For the empty praise of others, for the false belief that I could conquer the world alone. I never saw your worth until now, and it hurts to realize it too late. The sound of Kofi's voice, torn and full of grief, echoed into the night, a cry that carried beyond the walls of their home, shaking the very earth beneath their feet. The villagers, passing by on their evening duties, stopped in their tracks. The elders, wise and perceptive, turned their heads, recognizing that something sacred was unfolding in the house of Kofi and Amina. Whispers began to spread like wildfire, reaching the ears of all who lived nearby. The elders, those whose knowledge extended into the spiritual realm, were summoned. It was said that when the gods spoke, the world listened, and tonight the gods were speaking through Kofi's broken words, whispering to another, "This is not a simple matter. It is as if the spirits themselves have intervened. Kofi has confessed in a way no man ever has." The murmur of voices grew louder as the villagers gathered, drawn to the strange occurrence. Amina stood silently in the shadows, watching the scene unfold. She had not only exposed her husband's failings, but she had cast open the door to divine retribution. The villagers, who had always looked to Kofi as a pillar of strength, now saw him in a new light, one that was full of cracks and flaws. "Amina, I don't know how to fix this. I've hurt you so much. Can you ever forgive me?" Amina, though torn, could not bring herself to answer. She had heard his words, felt the weight of his regret, but the truth had already set its roots deep. Within her heart, his actions had spoken louder than his confessions ever could. The damage was done. As the elders arrived, their faces grave, they began to discuss Kofi's fate. Some spoke of redemption, others of punishment, but all knew that this was no ordinary moment. This was the work of the gods, a lesson to be learned, not just by Kofi, but by all who witnessed the fall of a man so proud and sure of himself. This is a sign, a warning. Kofi's confession is not just his own, but the voice of the spirits, telling us that no man is too great to be humbled. We must ask the gods for guidance. Only they can determine the true path forward. As the elders spoke, Amina stood at the edges of the gathering, her heart heavy, but her spirit lighter. The truth had been spoken, and though it had cost her dearly, she felt the weight of years of silence lifting from her shoulders. Kofi's confession, painful as it was, had brought a strange sense of justice. His pride had finally been shattered, and in that moment, Amina knew that the lesson would not be forgotten. The elders spoke, but Amina did not listen. Her heart was quiet now, for she had already won, though it was not the victory she had expected. It was not one of triumph over Kofi, but one of reclaiming herself. She had taught him humility, not through words, but through action, and in doing so, she had found a quiet victory of her own. The villagers began to leave, their voices still murmuring in awe and wonder. The evening had cast its shadows over the land, but Amina felt the first stirrings of peace as she turned to leave the room. She had given Kofi his reckoning, and now she would turn towards her own future. What came next, she did not know, but she had learned, at last, that no one could define her worth but herself. And so, the village too, learned a lesson that would echo for generations. Pride, once grown too large, would always fall, and in the fall, the truth would rise. The sun had barely risen the following morning when Kofi found himself alone with his thoughts. The night had been restless, and his mind was heavy with the weight of his own confession. He sat beneath the shade of a large baobab tree, his heart in turmoil, feeling the sting of shame that cut through his pride like a sharp blade. The words he had spoken, each one laced with regret, played over and over in his mind. I have failed her. Kofi whispered to the wind, his voice hoarse. My arrogance, my pride. They have turned me into a stranger to the one person who has stood by me, Amina. His heart clenched as he remembered her silent tears, the moments when she had looked at him with quiet desperation, how he had never truly seen her, never truly understood the depth of her sacrifice. The realization hit him like a thunderclap, shaking him to his core. He had been so consumed by his own desires and pride that he failed to recognize her pain. His hands trembled as he pressed them to his face, trying to erase the images that haunted him. Amina's soft smile had once been his refuge, her gentle voice his peace. But now, he wondered if that smile could ever return, or if it had been swallowed by the years of neglect and indifference he had shown her. Amina stood at the door, watching her husband from a distance, her heart heavy with conflicting emotions. She had heard his confession, felt the pain in his voice, and yet the wounds he had inflicted on her were not so easily healed. His apology, though raw and sincere, felt distant, like a mere echo of the man she once loved. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to hold on to the hope that the man who had betrayed her could truly change. But could she trust him again? Could she, after all the years of neglect and hurt, allow herself to love him once more? Her heart, torn between love and betrayal, beat loudly in her chest. Amina turned away from the door, feeling the weight of the decision that lay before her. The path of healing was not a simple one. She had learned, through years of silence, that love could not survive in the shadows of neglect. But her heart still longed for the man who had once held her close. What would happen if she chose to forgive him? And if she didn't, what would become of her? The elders, wise with years of experience and steeped in the traditions of the village, gathered around Kofi and Amina in the quiet of the afternoon. Their presence was commanding, yet calm, and their words, as always, carried the wisdom of generations. Listen to the earth, Kofi, one elder began, his voice like the deep rumble of a distant storm. It has borne witness to your pride, and it has seen the cost of your actions, but it is also a witness to the power of redemption, to the strength found in humility. The second elder, his hair as white as the moonlight, added softly, forgiveness is a seed. It grows only when nurtured by humility. If you seek to heal, Kofi, you must plant that seed in the soil of your actions, not just your words. The first elder nodded, his face creased with the weight of experience. The heart that has been broken cannot be mended by pride. It can only be healed through the tender care of the one who broke it. Redemption is not given, it is earned. The village gathered around, listening in reverent silence as the elders spoke. Amina's heart echoed with their words. She knew that the road to healing was not one of words alone. There would be no shortcuts, no easy answers. Both she and Kofi would have to change, deeply and profoundly. Kofi felt the weight of the elders' words settle over him like a cloak. They had spoken the truth, and he knew that their words were not just for him. They were for both him and Amina. He had to prove that his heart had truly changed, that he was no longer the man who had disregarded her needs, her dreams, her dignity. I will do whatever it takes, he whispered, his voice raw. I will walk the path of humility, not just for myself, but for her. Amina, standing on the edge of the gathering, heard his words. She didn't look at him. She couldn't, but she felt the sincerity in them. It was a start, she thought. But was it enough? Could she ever trust him again? As the village elders continued to speak, Amina's mind wandered to the quiet strength she had found within herself. The years of suffering, the loneliness, the silence. They had not broken,